The night began with champagne flutes clinking and the kind of forced laughter that made every corporate party feel like a bad dress rehearsal. But what happened next would shock anyone. What my wife did that night and the way it unfolded left me reeling in disbelief. Lauren, my wife, was radiant in a deep emerald dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. She had an effortless grace about her, the kind of poise that made people stop mid-conversation to take notice. It was one of the things I'd always loved about her, how she could make the ordinary feel extraordinary. But that night, something was off. Her energy wasn't just confident, it was razor sharp, almost predatory. From the moment we stepped into the venue, it was as though I became invisible. She slipped away from my side, glass in hand, effortlessly weaving through the crowd like a social butterfly with a purpose. Her laugh echoed across the room, a little too bright, a little too inviting. She touched arms casually, leaned in as she spoke, and her attention felt too personal. And then he appeared. The guy was tall, smug, with a cocky grin that made me want to punch something. His suit, a sleek navy number, fit too perfectly, like he wanted everyone to know it cost more than a mortgage payment. I'd noticed him before, hanging around Lauren's desk during a quick office drop-in. Back then, I thought nothing of it. Just friendly banter, right? But tonight, there was no mistaking the way his eyes lingered on her. It wasn't just him, though. Lauren leaned in toward him like gravity itself was pulling her closer. His hand rested on the small of her back, a move so subtle it almost looked innocent. Almost. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting back, drawing attention from everyone nearby. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a performance, loud enough to turn heads, including mine. I tried to stay calm. It's just a party, I told myself. People drink, they get too friendly, they say things they don't mean. Lauren wouldn't cross the line. She wouldn't. At least that's what I wanted to believe. Then came the toast. The CEO raised his glass, calling for silence to deliver a speech no one would remember in the morning. He droned on about success, teamwork, and innovation while everyone politely clinked their glasses. But I wasn't paying attention to him. My focus was glued to Lauren. She was standing way too close to him again. Their heads leaned in just a fraction too far, their body language too synchronized. And then as the CEO cracked a lame joke, I saw it, the glance they exchanged. Quick, fleeting, but charged with something I couldn't ignore. My stomach dropped. When the room burst into polite laughter, I didn't join in. I was too busy watching his hand slide down her arm. It wasn't overt, not enough to raise eyebrows, but it wasn't casual either. My pulse thundered in my ears. I tried to shake it off. You're imagining things, I told myself, but the voice in my head refused to quiet down. She's not pulling away. The CEO wrapped up his speech, and as people started to mingle again, I knew I couldn't stand on the sidelines any longer. I straightened my tie, forced a calm expression, and started moving toward them, pretending like nothing was wrong. But in Mesh, I was anything but calm. As I walked closer, I heard Lauren's voice, clear as day, saying something that stopped me in my tracks. You're awful, she giggled, playfully swatting at his chest. But maybe I like awful. It wasn't just the words, it was how she said them. That tone, coy, flirty, the kind of teasing she used to save for me. My jaw clenched, my hands curling into fists as I closed the distance. Am I interrupting? I asked, my voice cutting sharper than I intended. They both turned to me, Lauren's face lighting up with fake surprise. Oh, hey, babe, she said, her voice sugary sweet, as if I just popped out of nowhere. This is Chris, my colleague from marketing. Chris, I repeated flatly, extending a hand. He shook it, his grip too firm, his smirk too smug. It was the kind of look that made me want to knock him flat right then and there. Lauren quickly chimed in, her words spilling out like she was trying to cover something. We were just talking shop. Yeah, Chris added with a smoothness that made my blood boil. Lauren was just telling me about that brilliant pitch she came up with last week. You must be proud of her. The way he said it, the way he looked at me, was a subtle dig, like he was marking his territory. It wasn't just condescending, it was a warning. What could I say without turning this into a scene? The room was full of her coworkers, people who'd rally to her defense in a heartbeat. So I forced a smile, though inside I felt something break. The night dragged on, but Lauren's behavior only got worse. She laughed at Chris's jokes like he was the funniest man alive, touching his arm with an ease that made my stomach churn. She didn't even try to hide it. Her actions screamed that I was just another face in the crowd. By the time dessert came around, I'd had enough. As she walked past me toward the bar, I grabbed her arm, keeping my voice low. We need to talk. She sighed dramatically, her eyes rolling so hard I thought they'd get stuck. Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something? I stared at her, disbelief bubbling into anger. In the middle of what, Lauren? Flirting with Chris? Making me look like a damn fool? Her eyes narrowed, flashing with irritation. Don't start this here, she hissed. You're embarrassing yourself. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at the screen, her expression shifting from annoyance to panic. What was that? I asked, my voice a notch louder now. Her fingers curled around the phone as she stuffed it into her clutch. None of your business, she snapped, her mask slipping just enough for me to see the coldness underneath. I was about to press her, demand an explanation when she leaned in close. Her smile was plastic, but her tone was venom. If you can't handle a little socializing, maybe you should just go home. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she said them, dripping with icy contempt. For the first time, I wondered if I even knew the woman standing in front of me. I let her go, my hand falling to my side as I watched her saunter back to Chris. She didn't even glance back at me. My head spun, my chest tightening with a mix of rage and disbelief. The party raged on around me, but I couldn't stomach another second of her blatant disrespect. I left, but as I walked out into the cool night air, I had no idea that what would come after the party would make everything that happened inside feel like child's play. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The night replayed in my head like a broken record. The way Lauren laughed with Chris, the way she brushed me off like a stranger, and that phone notification. Her reaction to it wasn't normal. She was hiding something. I knew it in my gut. When I got home, the house felt colder than usual. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I dropped onto the couch, my mind spinning in a dozen different directions. Part of me wanted to confront her the second she walked through the door, demand answers, force the truth out of her. But another part of me, the part I hated, was terrified of what I might find if I pushed too hard. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. My anger slowly turned into a gnawing unease. Where was she? Lauren had never stayed out this late after a work event before. My foot tapped restlessly against the floor, the silence of the house making everything worse. Just as I reached for my phone to call her, it buzzed on the coffee table. Her name lit up the screen. I answered immediately. Lauren, where are you? Her voice came through, light and breezy, as if nothing was wrong. Hey, I'm on my way home. The party ran a little late. Something about her tone, too casual, too detached, set my teeth on edge. Are you okay? She added after a moment. I love you. The words hit me like a slap. I love you. How dare she? After everything I'd seen tonight? After the way she humiliated me in front of everyone? You love me? I spat, my voice trembling with anger. You've got a funny way of showing it, Lauren. Flirting with Chris all night, ignoring me like I didn't even exist. What the hell is going on with you? There was a pause, just long enough for me to catch a faint hum of music in the background. You're overreacting, she said finally, her tone clipped and defensive. Chris is just a colleague. You're reading into things because you're insecure. Insecure? I repeated, my voice rising. You were all over him, Lauren. Everyone could see it. And that message you got? You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Stop it, Eric, she snapped, her voice sharp now. I don't have time for this paranoia right now. Then make time, I shouted, my frustration boiling over. Where are you, Lauren? Because you sure as hell don't sound like someone heading home from a party. Another pause. This one longer, heavier. When she spoke again, her voice was laced with irritation. I told you, I'm on my way home. You need to calm down before I get there. This is getting ridiculous. And then she hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, my chest heaving, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Something wasn't adding up. Her tone, her excuses, it all felt wrong. I opened the Find My app, the one we'd enabled years ago for emergencies. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over her name before finally pressing it. My heart sank when her location appeared on the screen. She wasn't heading home. She wasn't anywhere near the party venue. The little blue dot on the map sat at the edge of town, parked right outside a dimly lit motel. My stomach turned to stone. Every logical part of me screamed to turn off the app, to put the phone down and trust her. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, in the part of my mind I'd tried to silence all night, I knew. Grabbing my jacket and keys, I barely registered the movement as I stormed out the door. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but one thing was crystal clear. I needed to know the truth. The drive to the motel was a blur of adrenaline and fury. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, my pulse hammering in my ears. The flickering neon sign came into view, casting an eerie glow across the cracked asphalt. Her car was there, parked in the far corner, tucked beneath a sputtering street lamp as though she'd wanted to hide it. I pulled in a few spaces away, my headlights off. Sitting there for a moment, I stared at her car, trying to make sense of this. Why here? Why now? The questions multiplied with every breath, but none of them came with answers I wanted to hear. Most of the motel's rooms were dark, their rusty doors blending into the shadows. But one, near the back, glowed faintly with the soft flicker of a television behind closed curtains. My gut twisted painfully. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The night air was cold and sharp, stinging my face, but I barely felt it. Every step toward that room felt heavier than the last, like my legs might give out beneath me. As I got closer, muffled voices drifted through the door. One of them was hers. The other was unmistakably a man's. I froze. For a brief moment, I considered turning around, getting back in the car, and pretending I never came here. Ignorance is bliss, isn't it? But her laughter from earlier, her lies, and the humiliation of that night flashed in my mind. No, I couldn't ignore this. My hand trembled as I knocked. 3 hard raps that echoed in the silence. The voices stopped immediately. There was a rustling inside, hurried movements like someone scrambling to cover their tracks. "Room service," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm and fury. The door cracked open a sliver, and there she was, Lauren. Her eyes were wide, her expression pale. She still wore the emerald dress from the party, but now it looked disheveled. Her hair was messy, her lipstick smudged. She looked like a stranger. "Eric," she said, her voice barely audible, "what are you doing here?" I leaned against the doorframe, locking eyes with her. "I could ask you the same thing." I pushed the door open further, stepping inside. The room was small, dingy, and reeked of stale cigarettes. On the edge of the bed sat Chris, his shirt unbuttoned, his expression smug. That look, casual, arrogant, and so utterly self-satisfied, ignited a fire in me I could barely contain. "You've got 10 seconds, I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "Explain, now." Lauren opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked terrified. For once stripped of the confidence and poise she always wore like armor. Behind her, Chris leaned back on his hands, the smirk never leaving his face. "You heard him," Chris said, his tone mocking, as if this was all a game. "Explain, Lauren." Her lips quivered as she tried to speak, but nothing came out. The silence in the room was suffocating, stretched tight with tension that felt ready to snap. I stepped closer, my voice like ice. "What the hell is going on here?" Lauren stammered, finally finding words, but they were hollow and meaningless. "Eric, it's not what it looks like. I can explain." I laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the room. "Not what it looks like," I said, gesturing to the two of them. "Then what is it, Lauren? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear." She looked down, avoiding my gaze. Chris, meanwhile, stood up slowly, his posture casual but his grin predatory. "Hey, man," he said, his voice smooth and insufferable. "Maybe you should calm down. We're all adults here." I turned to him, my fists clenched at my sides. "You're lucky I don't knock that smirk off your face right now." Chris raised his hands in mock surrender, his grin widening. "No need to get violent. It's not my fault she's curious." That was it, the last straw. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick with lies and the bitter taste of betrayal. I stepped inside without hesitation, forcing Lauren to move back. Her hand rested on the door as if she could still shut me out, but it was far too late for that. "Well," I pressed, my voice razor sharp, daring her to respond. "You wanted me to calm down earlier, so let's hear it. What's your calm, logical explanation for this?" Lauren flinched, her composure cracking. She turned toward the door as though to close it, but I kicked it shut with a force that made the frame shudder. Chris, who had been lounging on the bed, sat up slightly, his smirk faltering just enough to give away his discomfort. This isn't what it looks like," Lauren stammered, her voice shaking as her gaze darted between me and Chris. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign even to my own ears. "Really? Because it looks like my wife is in a motel room with her coworker at 1 in the morning. So why don't you enlighten me, Lauren? What exactly does this look like?" Her eyes flickered toward Chris, as if silently pleading for his help. He simply shrugged, his smirk creeping back onto his face with infuriating ease. "We were just talking," Chris said, his tone maddeningly casual. "Unwinding after the party, no big deal." "No big deal," I repeated, each word laced with venom. My gaze bore into Lauren's. "Is that true? You came all the way out here just to talk? Couldn't do that in the office? Or, I don't know, at home with me?" Her cheeks flushed crimson as her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "I didn't want to wake you," she muttered weakly. I laughed again, this time louder, harsher. There was no humor in it, just disbelief and anger. "Wake me? Lauren, do I look like an idiot to you? You've been lying to me all night. Hell, probably longer. And now you're caught, and this is the best excuse you've got?" Chris decided to speak up then, rising to his feet and brushing invisible dust off his pants. "Look, man," he said, trying to sound calm, "I think you're overreacting." "Shut up," I snarled, cutting him off. My voice was cold, steady, and full of warning. "This isn't about you." I let the silence hang for a moment, my eyes narrowing. Not yet. Chris froze, his smirk finally slipping away. Lauren stepped forward, her hand reaching for me, like she thought she could still smooth things over. "Please, let's just go home and talk about this." she said softly, her tone laced with desperation. I stepped back, shaking her hand off like it was poison. Talk? I repeated, my voice cracking under the weight of everything I was holding back. You want to talk now? After everything I've seen tonight? I haven't done anything, she shot back, her voice rising. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Blowing it out of proportion? My voice thundered as I gestured around the room. Lauren, you're in a motel room with Chris. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's betrayal. So don't you dare stand there and act like I'm crazy. For the briefest moment, her mask slipped, her shoulders sagged, her face pale and drawn, and something that resembled guilt flickered across her expression. But just as quickly, her defiance returned. Fine, she snapped, crossing her arms. If you're going to accuse me no matter what I say, then what's the point? Believe whatever you want. I'm tired of justifying myself to you. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her words. Chris, sensing the unbearable tension, began inching toward the door. I'll leave you two to figure this out, he muttered, avoiding my gaze as he reached for the handle. No, I said sharply, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. You're not going anywhere. Not until I get some damn answers. Chris froze, his hand hovering over the doorknob as he glanced back at Lauren. She shook her head slightly, her lips trembling. Chris, just go, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. This time, he listened, slipping out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving only silence in its wake. I turned back to Lauren, who had collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller now, deflated like the air had been let out of her entirely. Why, Lauren? I asked, my voice quieter but no less intense. What did I do to deserve this? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor as she wrung her hands. I don't know, she whispered at last, her voice barely audible. Maybe I just needed something different. Something exciting. Her words were a dagger to the chest. My breath left me in a rush, my hands trembling as I stared at her. Something different? I repeated, the words tasting like poison. You mean him, Chris? That's what you're willing to throw away our marriage for? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, no desire to comfort her. Not anymore. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said, her voice cracking. It just happened. It just happened? I spat, shaking my head in disbelief. Lauren, you don't accidentally end up in a motel room with someone. You made choices. Selfish, deliberate choices. And now what? You want me to forgive you? Pretend this never happened? I don't know, she sobbed, her tears streaming down her face. I stood there for a long moment, staring at her. The woman before me wasn't Lauren. Not the Lauren I thought I knew. She was a stranger. You've made your choices, I said finally, my voice cold and steady. Now I'm going to make mine. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Wait! But I was already walking toward the door, leaving her behind to face the wreckage of what she'd done. A home. Memories, promises whispered in the dark. All of it shattered for some fleeting thrill. Eventually, I found myself outside Nate's house, unable to face the emptiness of my own. Nate was my best friend. The kind of guy who'd always be there, no matter the hour. I texted him, "You awake?" Seconds later, the porch light came on. Nate opened the door, his face full of concern. He didn't ask questions, just stepped aside. Inside, I sank onto the couch, the weight of the night crashing down on me. Nate handed me a beer and sat across from me, waiting. She cheated, I said finally, the words bitter. Lauren? He asked, his brow furrowing. With Chris, from her office. Nate cursed under his breath. Damn. I'm so sorry, man. What happened? I told him everything, about the party, the motel, her excuses. He listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back, shaking his head. What are you gonna do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to burn it all down, make her feel what I'm feeling, but my voice faltered. There's another part of me that wonders if this is my fault. If I wasn't enough, exciting enough, attentive enough, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Don't do that, Nate said sharply. This isn't on you. Lauren made her choices, not you. I nodded, but his words didn't bring much comfort. I just don't know what's next. Do I leave her? Try to fix it? How do you trust someone after this? You don't, Nate said bluntly. Not unless she earns it back, but that's not something you figure out tonight. We sat in silence for a while, the beer in my hand growing warm. Eventually, Nate offered me the couch for the night. I accepted. The thought of going back to the house Lauren and I had built together was unbearable. But even in the quiet darkness of Nate's living room, I couldn't sleep. Her face in that motel room haunted me. Not with guilt or regret, but with annoyance, like I was the one ruining her night. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just the trust between us that was gone, it was the respect. She didn't respect me, and maybe she never had. That thought hardened something inside me. If she thought I was weak, someone she could manipulate and discard, she was dead wrong. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't crumble under this. If Lauren wanted a war, she'd get one, and I wouldn't be blindsided again. When I left Nate's house, a plan was already forming in my mind. Exhaustion from the sleepless night only fueled my resolve. Back home, the silence of the house was deafening. Her car was in the driveway, and I found her in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like it was just another morning. "You didn't come home last night," she said, looking up with a guarded expression. "Neither did you," I shot back. "Or have you conveniently forgotten where I found you?" Her jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she set her phone down and folded her arms. "Eric, I don't want to fight. I've been thinking, and I think we need to talk." "Talk?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You had plenty of chances to talk last night, Lauren. Instead, you lied, dismissed me, and ran off to a motel with Chris. So forgive me if I'm not feeling chatty." She flinched, but quickly regained composure. "I get that you're angry. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it." I cut her off, my voice rising. "You humiliated me. At the party, at the motel. Do you have any idea how that feels?" "I didn't," she began but stopped herself. "You didn't what?" I pressed. "Didn't mean to cheat? Didn't mean to destroy our marriage? Because from where I'm standing, every choice you made was deliberate." Her hands tightened around her coffee mug. "I know I messed up," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I I wasn't thinking straight," she stammered, her voice trembling. "It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice cracking as the weight of her words hit me. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I saw?" Her eyes filled with tears, but this time I didn't let it sway me. I'd seen her cry before, seen her use those tears to manipulate and deflect. Not now, not this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what else to say." I stared at her, the woman I'd once loved so deeply, and felt only a hollow ache where that love used to be. "You think sorry fixes this?" I said, my voice colder than I thought possible. "Lauren, sorry doesn't even scratch the surface. You destroyed everything we built together. For what? A cheap thrill?" She didn't answer, her silence screaming louder than any excuse she could offer. The weight of it all, her betrayal, her lies, the hollow truth of our life together, threatened to crush me. But instead of breaking, something inside me hardened. "I'm done," I said finally, my voice steady. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm done letting you control the narrative," I said firmly. "Done pretending this marriage can be salvaged. You made your choice, Lauren. Now I'm making mine." "Wait, Eric?" she pleaded, standing and reaching for me. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, anything. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." Her words might have sounded sincere if I hadn't seen her in that motel room, heard her dismiss me like I was an inconvenience. "I gave you chances, Lauren," I said coldly. 6 years of loyalty, love, and trust, and you threw it all away the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you." Tears spilled freely down her face now, but I didn't care. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started packing my things. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Leaving," I said simply. "I'll figure out the legal stuff later, but for now, I can't be here. Not with you." "Eric, please," she sobbed, following me from room to room. "Don't do this. Don't throw everything away." I stopped in the doorway of the bedroom and turned to face her, my expression unreadable. "I'm not the one who threw it away, Lauren. That was you." Her face crumpled, but I didn't wait for her response. With my bag in hand, I walked out, not looking back. As I drove away, a strange sense of relief began to settle over me. The pain was still there, raw and relentless, but beneath it was something new. Freedom. Lauren had shattered our marriage, but she wouldn't break me. Not completely. By the time I reached Nate's house, I had made a vow to myself. I would rebuild my life piece by piece without her. Leaving Lauren wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations, long conversations with Nate, and moments of reflection that always circled back to the same thought. This wasn't over. I couldn't stop replaying it all in my mind, her lies, her dismissiveness, the smug look on Chris's face. One thing became clear. I wasn't just walking away. Lauren needed to feel the consequences of her actions. And Chris, he wasn't getting off the hook either. It started with a call to an attorney. I wanted to know my options, and as it turned out, I had more leverage than I thought. We didn't have kids, but we shared finances. Lauren had always managed the household bills, but she didn't know I'd been keeping track. Suspicious hotel charges, unexplained purchases, and work events that didn't add up. I had everything documented. "Gather it all," the attorney advised. "If this goes to court, you want to be prepared." But it wasn't enough just to protect myself. Lauren and Chris needed to understand what they'd done. The first strike was a carefully worded email to Lauren's boss. I didn't have to ask for action. The weight of my accusations, combined with their company's reputation, would handle the rest. The second strike was more personal. I called Rachel, a mutual friend and one of Lauren's closest confidants. "Eric," she said when she picked up, "what's going on? Lauren said you left." "Did she tell you why?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. No, Rachel sounded cautious. What happened? I told her everything. Her silence on the other end was deafening, and when I finished, she let out a low whistle. Wow, she said at last. Lauren and Chris underestimated me. They thought I'd crumble, retreat into the shadows while they got away with their lies, but they didn't realize who they were dealing with. The fallout of my carefully planned strikes hit harder than I imagined. Lauren's boss responded swiftly to my email, calling her into a meeting the very next day. By the time she left that office, she was suspended pending an internal investigation. As for Chris, word of his involvement spread through the company like wildfire. His cocky smirk didn't last long. Rumors of their affair reached his fiancée, and she kicked him out within a week. But that was just the beginning. I focused on myself for the first time in years. Long conversations with Nate, hours at the gym, and quiet moments of reflection helped me rebuild the pieces of my life. Each step forward felt like a small victory. Lauren tried to contact me a few times, her messages a mix of desperate apologies and half-hearted attempts to shift the blame. I ignored them all. She had made her choices, and I wasn't about to let her back into my life. Then came the day of the divorce hearing. Lauren walked in with her head down, looking nothing like the confident, radiant woman I once knew. She looked broken, but I felt nothing. The attorney presented everything: the suspicious charges, the lies, the betrayal. Lauren didn't even fight it. When the judge finalized the divorce, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt relief, freedom. Months passed, and life started to feel normal again. The house was sold, and I used my share to move into a smaller place closer to work. It was quiet but peaceful, a fresh start.